Alabama voters are heading to the polls in a hard-fought U.S. Senate race with high stakes for President Donald Trump, who has endorsed fellow Republican Roy Moore in spite of allegations against him of sexual misconduct toward teenagers. Mr. Moore, 70, a former Alabama Supreme Court Chief Justice, is battling former U.S. Attorney Doug Jones, a Democrat, for the Senate seat. Mr. Jones, 63, hopes to pull off an upset victory in the deeply conservative southern state. The race will test Mr. Trump's political clout after nearly a year in office, with his approval ratings at historically low levels. A win by Mr. Moore would strengthen Mr. Trump's grip on the Republican Party, some of whose leaders have not backed Mr. Moore. A Jones victory would mean trouble for Mr. Trump and his populist political base. It also would narrow the Republicans' already slim majority in the U.S. Senate, possibly making it harder for Mr. Trump to advance his policy agenda. Polls opened at 7 a.m. local time in the Alabama special election for the seat vacated by Republican Jeff Sessions, who became U.S. Attorney General in the Trump administration. Voters interviewed outside the polls in Montgomery, the state capital, on a chilly Tuesday morning said the sexual misconduct allegations against Mr. Moore were inconclusive. There's speculation these are 40-year-old charges and they should have come out before the election, said Robert Morrison, 74. Geneva Calvert, 80, said she was voting for Mr. Moore because he would help advance Mr. Trump's agenda. Peggy Judkes, 48, said she voted for Mr. Jones and that Mr. Moore was a bad candidate even before all this molesting stuff made national headlines. Moore got thrown out of office 2 or 3 times before, she said. So why would you put him back in? That's crazy. Republicans have been bitterly divided over whether it is better to support Mr. Moore to protect their Senate majority or shun him because of the sexual allegations. Mr. Trump has strongly backed Mr. Moore, but several other Republicans, including Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, have distanced themselves from the candidate. Roy Moore will always vote with us. Vote Roy Moore, Mr. Trump said in a Twitter post in which he criticized Mr. Jones as a potential puppet of the Democratic congressional leadership. Mr. Moore has been accused by multiple women of pursuing them when they were teenagers and he was in his 30s, including one woman who said he tried to initiate sexual contact with her when she was 14. Mr. Moore has denied any misconduct and Reuters has not independently verified any of the accusations. The allegations come amid an unprecedented wave of sexual misconduct accusations against men in power. Mr. Trump also faces such allegations and has denied them. On the eve of Tuesday's election, Mr. Moore was joined on the campaign trail by Steve Bannon, Mr. Trump's former chief strategist. Mr. Bannon framed the Alabama election as a showdown between establishment elites and populist power and excoriated Republicans who declined to support Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore, who was twice removed from the state Supreme Court for refusing to abide by federal law, has made conservative Christian beliefs a centerpiece of his campaign and sought to energize evangelical Christians in Alabama.